Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to start to tackle some of this Israeli business today before I can get to the rest of it. Because before I can get to the real story, which is where these people came from out of Russia and the Poland area, the people that Golda Meir and those people. But first, we need to roll back the curtain a little bit. Does Israel really own that land? So we're going to start with they claim they have a 4,000-year biblical right to the land. And Netanyahu is going around, Netanyahu, he's invoking Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Christian Zionism in the USA. What's going on with all that? So we're going to trace this person named Yahweh, Yahweh. Yahweh started out as a tribal war god to universal deity, to what some scholars today call the psychopath god, violent commands, exclusivity, emotional volatility. So, first, we're going to start off with the Greek influence. Yahweh's name became Kairos and Theos. And then what they did was they fused it all together. And that all happened because of that Bible, the Vatican secret holding, those hidden Bibles the public has never seen, and the Eastern Orthodox monasteries still safeguarding ancient materials. So a lot of information they still seem to be hiding, or they say safeguarding. So we're going to take a look at all that because we need to understand this Yahweh person or deity or whatever they want to call it. But before I get started, these people all connect, all of them. I was reading the other day that Trump was taking a 10% stake in Intel, the first one that the U.S. is taking a stake in. So the U.S. we're moving quickly into the socialism part. So we're going to talk about this real briefly because Intel was a reason I started this work over 30 years ago. So, just for the heck of it, when I saw that they were getting a 10% stake to the U.S. government, I thought, well, let's take a little look here. There were three people involved in the beginnings of Intel: Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore, and Andy Grove. Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore were actually the founders, and Andy Grove came along as the CEO president when Robert Noyce went away and moved to Texas. So when I started Intel, it was about 1978. They'd been in business at that time around 10 years ago, 10 years or so. Still a fairly small company. There were just a few thousand employees. So let's first look at Robert Noyce. Where'd he come from? Well, I'm not going to drag you through the whole thing, but Robert Noyce, I tied him to the Mayflower elder William Brewster. So, and that was confirmed in the Brewster genealogy of 1908. And Noyce represented the American Protestant establishment. Family had ministers in it tracing back to those pilgrims. So ding, 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 we got a gypsy there, right? The other one, Gordon E. Moore. Gordon Moore was the one who did the famous quote, the Moore's Law. And Gordon Moore made an interesting quote around that time frame, and I remember it clearly because when the computer chips, when they're first talking about um, computers in the home, or just computers in general, laptops, Gordon Moore made the statement that he really could not see the reason for computers except for something that maybe housewives could use in the home to keep track of recipes and stuff. So that was Gordon Moore. And his family, okay, he came through the Howard Howland line and he connects to the Delano, Delano line. FDR came from the Delano line. The Delano line is over there in the Netherlands. And so he connects to people who were Mayflower passengers, and he was a direct descendant of Alden and Mullen. So, yes. And Andrew Grove, he came out of Hungary. I'm very suspicious of Andy Grove, always have been really. And yeah, he supposedly left the communism behind and came to America and then hooked up with Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce. and they three of them ran Intel. But one thing about Andy Grove, and then I'll keep moving here. His surname, before he changed his name, he anglicized his name, was Groff, Grof, and Groff could mean count in that area, but I don't know. Yeah, they all come from somebody. So, what are we going to be talking about today? This Yahweh, Jesus, Zionism, hidden scriptures, and how Yahweh as Israel's national tribal god. So, Yahweh is a big deal in the world over there. This is the name of a pagan deity that transferred from other languages eventually into Hebrew. It's the name of some Egyptian deity that both the Latins and the Hebrews worship, and that is Yahweh, and that came from the Hebrew voices. So, anyhow, so what he has been talking about, Netanyahu, is he has been talking about the greater Israel, and that is a both political and religious roots to that. Politically, it often refers to retaining or expanding Israeli control over the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and sometimes areas east of the Jordan River. Greater Israel also means something religiously. Some Zionist and biblical traditions tie it to God's covenant with the Israelites from the Nile to the Euphrates. By calling it a spiritual mission, Netanyahu is framing state policy as not just security or survival, but as fulfillment of divinely sanctioned destiny. And they say it's God's covenant with the Israelites from the Nile to the Euphrates. Why it's politically explosive for Israelis. It resonates strongly with religious, nationalist settlers and voters who see territorial expansion as a mitzvah or a commandment. What does it mean for the Palestinians? It suggests their land is viewed as preordained for Israeli possession, undermining any two-state solution. What does it mean for the international community? Well, it sounds expansionist and uncompromising, especially when tied to biblical prophecy rather than negotiated security needs. So we have that to the Nile Euphrates word, that covenant verses are the religious root of the greater Israel idea. By invoking this as a spiritual mission, Netanyahu isn't just talking about security. He's tapping into an over 3,000-year-old narrative of divine entitlement that makes compromise far more difficult. And how does this all happen? Well, most people actually absorb religion secondhand from sermons, from church talks, or selective Bible readings without digging into where those stories actually came from, how they were written, and why they were stitched together in the first place. The origin story behind the Bible. And listen to this very carefully. What does the name say? Bible. Bible. Like bull crap. The Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, wasn't a single download of divine text. It was compiled over centuries by priests, scribes, and political elites in different eras, often to unify tribes, justify land claims, or centralize worship, like the Jerusalem temple reforms. We have the promised land passages from Nile to Euphrates. They likely date from Elexic or post-exilic periods when displaced Israelites needed a unifying myth or destiny. In other words, it was as much a political psychology as theology. Later, when Christians adopted the Hebrew scriptures, these land promises were spiritualized, applied to the kingdom of heaven instead of geography. But in Jewish and modern Zionist readings, the literal map stayed on the table. Well, why don't most people know this? Well, because of preachers and churches. Most sermons simplify the text into moral lessons or spiritual truths. Historical, critical background isn't emphasized. It can feel destabilizing. Bible reading. People encounter verses as self contained, God's Word, not as part of a composite text shaped by shifting politics, exiles, and wars. Cultural tradition. Faith is often inherited. The deeper origin stories, like Yahweh starting as a desert storm god or Genesis being edited during Babylonian exile, rarely enter popular teaching. Why this matters for the international community. When leaders like Netanyahu frame territorial policy in covenantal terms, even indirectly, it sounds expansionist and non negotiable to the outside world. To international diplomats, prophecy based land claims are not subject to compromise or treaties. That's why they read as paranoid or messianic. They put negotiations outside the realm of normal politics. Yes, it's by saying, well, it's always been this way. We've always had this land. We're just kind of trying to reinforce it. But many in Israel and in Christian Zionist circles abroad don't question the origin story. They take the covenant at face value, unaware that it was a political religious text assembled in antiquity, not a literal land deed from heaven. So, ordinary believers are often unaware of how these texts came to be because there were all these texts, and they took all those texts from all those years before, and that's where they came up with the first part of the Bible. Political leaders exploit the verses' mystique to mobilize support. International community, they hear an uncompromising claim that clashes with modern statecraft. And they use the tool of it's complicated. Elites, politicians, even religious leaders often repeat, the Middle East is complicated. They've been fighting for thousands of years. That framing paralyzes ordinary people. It suggests the conflict is ancient, tribal, unsolvable. So why even try to understand or intervene? In reality, much of the conflict's modern shape, borders, and war settlements comes from decisions made in the last 100 to 150 years. Colonial carve-ups, the Balfour Declaration, 1948 war, 1967 occupation, U.S. and Soviet Cold War policies, not forever, but recent geopolitics layered on old myths, MYTHS. So, what's the effect on the ordinary person? Well, they get overwhelmed. People think, well, I'll never untangle this. They become disempowered. What do I know compared to rabbis, imams, and presidents or UN diplomats? They feel detached. It feels safer to step back, letting elites and institutions dominate the narrative. So, why do the elites benefit from this? Because they present it as complexity, and that's a shield against accountability. If it's too ancient and too messy, then military campaigns, land grabs, or aid packages can be justified without scrutiny. Citizens are then less likely to demand a moral stance or policy change if they feel it's above their pay grade. Bottom line, the line, it's too complicated, is itself a form of propaganda. The more ordinary people believe it, the more power stays locked in the hands of elites who benefit from perpetual conflict. Understanding even one piece clearly makes you less manipulable. The complicated smokescreen. When elites say, you don't understand, it's complicated. They're not actually inviting deeper thought. They're shutting down inquiry. It's the same tactic used in finance, law, and medicine and theology. Wrap things in jargon, add layers of committees and commissions, and suddenly ordinary people feel unqualified to challenge authority. But the pattern is very simple: power, land, money, and control, dressed up in religious or geopolitical languages. If you strip away the rhetoric, the conflicts always reduce to who gets resources, who gets to rule, and who is silenced. The thousands of years of fighting narrative is deceptive because it hides the very modern deals, treaties, and manipulations that kept the struggle alive. Once exposed, people see that the complication was the disguise. The lie was never the tangled story itself, but the illusion that only elites could interpret it. I've seen them say stuff like this. There's that guy Norm Finkelstein guy, big liar. He sits there. I actually heard it out of his mouth. He said, "Well, we really understand this. I've written all these books and stuff. It's up to us. It's up to us to explain it to those common people." We're always referred to as those people, right? So, why it's so hard to trust when leaders use religion, prophecy, or destiny to justify expansion, but everyone can see the tanks, bulldozers, and dollars behind it, trust erodes. Once you see the trick, it becomes very hard to take their words at face value ever again. And distrust spreads not just toward those leaders, but toward institutions themselves, churches, governments, and media. Ordinary people, Israeli, Palestinian, Americans, Europeans, Africans, are asked to sacrifice taxes, sacrifice their sons and daughters, and their moral credibility. Meanwhile, the ones in ivory towers gamble with other people's lives, treating war and peace as chess moves in a grand narrative. It actually isn't complicated. It's deliberately entangled so that ordinary people stop asking hard questions. The complexity is a mask for the lies, and once the mask slips, trust is almost impossible to rebuild. And that's what they're doing now. They're actually encouraging the lack of trust because they want to stage a civil war. See how it all works? So, the strategy of complexity, politics, the Middle East has thousands of years of history. You couldn't possibly understand it. If you ask them about finance, they say, well, derivatives and quantitative easing are technical, best left to the experts. Nuclear energy, well, reactors, grids, waste management, all too complicated for public debate. When it comes to medicine and health, well, only specialists can interpret the data. It works because people don't want to look foolish. They retreat from asking questions. At the heart, a nuclear plant is not conceptually complicated. They split atoms for fission. It releases heat. The heat boils the water, makes the steam, turns the turbines. The turbines generate electricity. That's the same principle as a coal or gas plant. The only extra piece is how you safely control and cool the reactor core. But when wrapped in layers of technical language, secrecy, and regulatory fog, the public is told, don't worry about it. It's too complicated. Leave it to us. This shields decision makers from accountability on cost overruns, safety lapses, or sitting decisions. Why this approach persists: concentration of power, complexity, a complex narrative protects centralized control. It's a deflection of criticism. If lay people are told they can't possibly understand, their objections can be dismissed as naive. Profit and policy shield. It keeps financial backers, contractors, and politicians insulated from scrutiny. So when you strip it down, nuclear plants, they boil water to turn in a turbine. Wars are to seize and defend land and resources. Banking crises are really loans repackaged until they collapse. Religious land claims, they're myths turned into politics. It's really a designed fog machine. So it actually is authority conditioning from school on. People are taught to trust experts in white coats, suits, and pulpits. Questioning is framed as ignorance or even danger. Fear of being wrong. It feels safer to parrot, I trust the doctors, than to engage critically, because if they're wrong, they can blame the system, not themselves. There's social pressure in group settings. Challenging the expert narrative can brand someone as crazy, conspiratorial, or anti science. Many would rather conform. There's this comfort of certainty. Experts often have neat answers like take this pill, sign this loan, support this war. That simply a that simplify a chaotic world. Alternative views feel destabilizing. So if you say, here's a nutrient or therapy that's been studied and could help you, many will shut down. They'll say things like, no thanks, I'll trust my doctor. Or they even say things, I've had people say this, well, when did you get your medical degree? On one level, that instinct protects them. Not all life hacks are valid, but it also blocks genuine knowledge sharing, especially when institutionalized medicine is influenced by profit, pharma, and insurance. Over time, and this is the interesting part, this reflex creates a population that polices itself, dismisses ideas before they ever challenge the hierarchy. The most powerful censorship isn't top down, it's when regular people enforce the narrative on each other. This way, the elites don't have to crush dissent. Neighbors, coworkers, family do it voluntarily, shaming anyone who steps outside the official line. It creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. People don't just avoid questioning, they actively mock those who try. So when someone says, well, I prefer to trust actual doctors, they're really not saying they trust science. They're saying they trust institutions, hospitals, FDA, journals, licensing boards, which are themselves entwined with money and politics. The tragic part is people often mistake institutional authority for truth, when in reality, truth often has to fight against institutions before it's ever accepted. So, ordinary people often become the strongest defenders of elite deception. They're not being malicious, they're conditioned. But the effect is exactly the same, silencing alternatives, upholding authority, and ridiculing those who come with the truth. So, why do the masses end up enforcing the lie? Well, there's safety in numbers. It feels easier to align with the herd than risk being isolated. They use borrowed authority. Quoting the experts gives people a sense of being smart and protected without doing the hard thinking themselves. Fear of punishment. History is full of truth tellers punished, mocked, or ostracized. People instinctively avoid that risk for themselves. I can speak to that one, but don't get me started. Illusion of virtue. By repeating the elite line, trust the doctors, support the war, people feel moral, responsible, even superior, like they're on the right side. And I'll give you a couple cases of people carrying the water, and why they got people. Excuse me, people coming up with the truth and how they got just slammed. The biggest one I could find was Ignaz Semitius in 1840s. This person discovered that hand washing with disinfectant drastically reduced hospital deaths. Other doctors mocked and rejected him. Nurses and staff often defended the old way because the experts dismissed this person as unstable. The result, thousands died unnecessarily. Today, hand washing is basic science. Yeah, when these pigs took over around the 1700s, they made up this whole idea, doctors. But I'm not going to jump ahead of my skis here. You're going to have to decide when I'm done today if you believe that the Bible is true or any of this stuff wasn't just made up, okay? I mean, they didn't even understand basic hand washing. And one other example, because I could go on and on, the lead in gasoline from the 1920s to the 1970s. Industry said lead additives were safe. Scientists who raised alarms were crushed. Neighbors, journalists, even other scientists repeated the safe line. Decades of poisoning later, we now know that lead was catastrophic for public health and IQ. Oh, I did have one more. Antibiotics in mold. Early reports of mold or penicillin killing bacteria were dismissed as flukes. Even in labs, assistants rolled their eyes at wild claims. Only persistence turned penicillin into a global medical revolution. Yeah, because, remember, they printed the money, okay? They cooked it all up. So they were the ones who were able to have grand palaces, big places of learning, all this stuff. So by outward appearances, these psychopaths look smart. But here's the catch: most people in the public, for some reason, believe that psychopaths are both evil and smart. I would have to say they're evil, but not so smart and not so good up in the ticky ticky. So, what happened at every stage of these things, like antibiotics and hand washing? At every stage, it wasn't just the elites protecting their interests, it was millions of ordinary people enforcing the elite narrative, ridiculing new ideas, and keeping the lie alive. That's the tragedy. The majority has the numbers, but too often the majority lends its voice to the few who profit. There's more of us than them, but as long as most of us are willing to carry their water out of fear, pride, or habit, the balance of power does not change. History shows the pattern. Truth starts at the margins, gets mocked, resisted, then eventually breaks through once people stop defending the lie. So let's take a look at how some of our early conditioning got started, because most children were raised with picture Bibles, colorful drawings of Noah's Ark, David versus Goliath, Jesus with those sheep. And believe me, if you love that Bible, I mean no disrespect toward you, but just try to hear me out, okay? Because people got really quite nasty when I approached the Bible a few years ago. So just try to hear me out, because we have been conditioned, okay? That is mental propaganda. These illustrations collapse complexity into fairy tale simplicity. Bad guys versus good guys. Chosen people versus enemies. Salvation versus destruction. By the time these children are adults, the form of belief is set. Trust authority. Don't ask where the story came from. Once someone is conditioned to take the Bible as the unquestionable truth, the same reflex can be easily redirected. Doctors, they know you don't. Trust them. Preachers, they interpret, you obey. Politicians and experts, too complicated, leave it to us. The skill of asking, what is this, is never developed. In fact, it's often punished as doubt, rebellion, or sin. Most people never stop to ask, who wrote these texts? Why are there two versions of the creation story in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2? Why do Gospels tell the resurrection differently? Who chose which books made it into the Bible and which were thrown out? If you grow up hearing, well, this is God's world, don't question it, that habit of not asking transfers to every authority in your life. The result is deep trust in institutions, medicine, religion, and government all benefit from that early obedience. Self policing communities, doubters are shamed, silenced, or prayed for, which keeps the herd intact. Fear of knowledge, the very act of questioning feels dangerous, like pulling on a thread that could unravel not just the Bible, but your entire worldview. And they have this vengeful God narrative is one of the most powerful tools of social control. They use fear as a control mechanism. A loving God invites reflection, compassion, and maybe even questioning. A vengeful God terrifies people into obedience without thought. In the Bible, this God destroys cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, sends plagues, opens the earth to swallow dissenters, and threatens eternal torment. The lesson gets drilled in: step out of line and you will be punished. So, why do the elites use this vengeful God? Well, the preachers use it because fear of hell keeps people tithing, attending, and submitting to authority. Rulers use a vengeful God because kings and politicians uses God's wrath to legitimize war. God commands us. We are chosen. Parents and teachers use the vengeful God because invoking divine punishment makes kids easier to manage. God is watching. Fear of divine vengeance comes as an invisible police force. You don't need soldiers in every home if you've convinced people that God is already inside, watching and judging. Yeah, they also sound like quite the stalkers, don't they? So, how does this impact us psychologically? Well, it's internalized surveillance. People police their own thoughts and actions, feeling guilty even when no one is watching. Group enforcement. Communities turn on anyone who challenges the narrative, fearing God's wrath might spread to them. Suspension of curiosity. If questioning authority equals provoking God's anger, then asking, what is this thing, feels like a life or death rebellion. The cycles of control introduce fear, teach from childhood that God punishes rebellion. Reinforce fear. Preachers, teachers, parents repeat these stories endlessly. Transfer fear. The same reflex, don't rebel, extends to doctors, governments, and leaders. Perpetual fear. Doubt itself is framed as dangerous. If you question, you risk hellfire. Bottom line, the vengeful God isn't just theology, it's behavioral conditioning. It keeps people in line long after the preacher leaves the room. A God of wrath becomes the ultimate enforcer for elites, making obedience feel not only safe, but sacred. The Bible, especially in its simplified, illustrated, and unquestioned form, trains people into obedience without inquiry. That same material reflex makes it much easier to trust doctors, preachers, and politicians without ever asking hard questions. It's really not about faith in God, it's about faith in authority. And this vengeful God framework sets the stage for the Jesus myth because it creates a problem that only Jesus can now solve. So, how they set this up? The vengeful God is a problem. In Hebrew scriptures, God demands sacrifice, obedience, and punishes sin with death, exile, or destruction. The message becomes humans are guilty, sinful, broken, and can't possibly meet God's impossible standards. This creates a deep psychological burden, fear plus guilt. Where do they pivot? Well, the New Testament reframes the problem. God is still vengeful and just, but he provides a loophole. Jesus' death is presented as the ultimate blood sacrifice, satisfying God's wrath once and for all. In this theology, the vengeful God doesn't disappear. He's the reason Jesus had to die. Without the wrathful God, the crucifixion loses its cosmic drama. It becomes just another execution. So, why it works as a myth, emotional hook, the fear of the vengeful God, plus relief that Jesus saves. The guilt cycle. Believers are told you put Jesus on the cross with your sins, which makes them feel responsible, indebted, and obedient. Authority handoff. Priests, pastors, and churches claim the power to interpret and mediate that salvation. So the control mechanism continues. Let's look at the historical context. Early Jesus followers lived under Rome's crushing empire. A suffering Savior who defeated death provided hope, but also obedience. Endure now, reward later. As the church institutionalized, the story became a perfect way to manage populations. Vengeful God equals fear. Jesus' sacrifice equals loyalty. Church equals the gatekeeper of salvation. So, what they do in these different Bibles, they say different things. Like the Old Testament says, vengeful God destroys sinners, and that gives them obedience through fear. The New Testament talks about vengeful God requires blood, obedience through gratitude and guilt. And the church age, leaders mediate both obedience to authority, and that equals obedience to God. So the Jesus myth isn't a break from the vengeful God, it's the logical extension. The wrath problem was never solved. It was repackaged into a salvation economy where Jesus pays the debt and the church collects the payments, obedience, money, and loyalty. So let's dig into this Yahweh person. But before I do that, I really need to take a break here. So I'll be back on the other side. Okay, let's talk about Yahweh. The name Yahweh, often invoked today as the eternal God of Israel, is historically rooted in the complex and fluid world of ancient Near Eastern religion. Far from being a timeless, monolithic figure, Yahweh began as a regional pagan deity and was absorbed into the Israelite pantheon, and only centuries later reimagined as the singular God of Judaism. This evolution reveals how theology was reshaped into political authority and later deployed as justification for land claims and national identity. So, who is Yahweh in their historical context? Yahweh was an ancient Semitic deity of weather and war in the Lebanon. His earliest associations were Seir, Edom, Haran, and Teman, regions south of Judah, near Egypt. Evidence places Yahweh worship as early as the late Bronze Age to early Iron Age. Yahweh carries traits of a storm and warrior god, leading armies and fructifying land, attributes common among Semitic deities. In the earliest biblical texts, Yahweh is depicted as a militant tribal deity guiding Israel in battle. It has a Canaanite roots. The Israelite language was polytheist in origin, derived from the broader Canaanite tradition. The Israelite pantheon originally included El, keep that in mind, which was a chief god, Baal for storm and war, and Asher was a fertility mother goddess. Yahweh began as a lesser deity within this pantheon. And keep in mind, I have everything you ever want to know about any of this stuff over my website. I'm trying to encourage everybody to learn about this because it's a lot to try to absorb just during one podcast. And unless we understand it ourselves, then we run the risk of going around and telling people the wrong information, which happens time and time and time again. So this is important to pay attention to because over the centuries, Yahweh was conflated with El, taking on the titles and attributes of the high God. Asher was recast as Yahweh's consort before eventually being erased. Epithets such as El Shaddai, which means God Almighty, shifted to Yahweh alone. As Israelite identity hardened, especially during the Babylonian exile, editors of biblical texts eliminated rival gods. Yahweh was then transformed into the sole creator and exclusive deity. This shift was theological, not historical, a rewriting of memory to legitimize monotheism. Substitutions of the name. During the Second Temple period, Jews began replacing Yahweh with Adoni, which means my Lord, in liturgical readings. By the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the original pronunciation was lost. With the rise of the Scofield dispensation, which was 1909 to 1970, the promise of land became framed as unconditional and eternal. I did a whole show about the Scofield, and I'm going to be getting into that a little bit today also, because the Scofield, which happened between 1909 to 1917, really flipped the entire switch over that entire region. This theological shift provided modern Zionism and Christian Zionism with an absolute claim to territory, erasing the covenantal conditions. So that's why they use the mantra effect. Leaders like Netanyahu repeat phrases like Abrahamic, Isaac, Jacob, 4,000 years, eternal home as their mantras. This repetition bypasses rational debate and reframes political borders as sacred truths. Biblical rhetoric thus operates as a political shield, converting contested land into God's will. The historical record dismantles the idea of Yahweh as the timeless, exclusive God of Israel. Instead, the evidence shows this. Yahweh has its origins in paganism. Yahweh began as a weather war god of Edom and the southern Lebanon. Yahweh was absorbed into the Canaanite Israelite pantheon, and it was conflated with El, associated with Asheron. Only centuries later was Yahweh elevated as the sole creator. In the Egyptians, his name appears in pagan, magical, proving cross-cultural adoption from the Egyptians. Keep that in mind. So then the Scofield theology and political rhetoric reframed Yahweh into an eternal title deed, justifying Israeli territorial claims today. So we have Yahweh's transformation from the pagan storm god to the sole deity to the political mantra is less about divine truth than about power. History shows us not a straight line of unbroken covenants, but a process of absorption editing, and reinterpretation, one now wielded as a weapon in modern geopolitics. So who was El? Because remember, Yahweh was conflated with El. El was the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon. What are the attributes of El? Well, the creator of the world. El is supposedly the patriarchal figure called El Elyon, God Most High. And El's consort was Ashron, the mother goddess, father of gods and men, sitting at the head of the divine council of Elohim. So Israelites inherited this religious world. The very word Elohim, plural form used for God in the Hebrew Bible, is linguistically tied to El. So Yahweh was not originally a universal creator, but a tribal God. Over time, especially in Judah and Israel, from Iron Age onward, Yahweh and El were merged into one figure. So they had the El Elyon. Oh, I can't pronounce some of these words, but yeah, what happened was they eventually morphed it into El became Yahweh. And remember, El is the root word for the elites. Well, they consider themselves gods, right? So I'll keep reading here. So, uh, by conflating Yahweh with El, Yahweh inherited Ashan, at least for a time, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So El was originally the creator deity. Yahweh was the warrior. So then they kind of flip things around, right? So as Israelite states consolidated, having one high God unified the national identity. So rival deities like Baal and Ashron were suppressed, and Yahweh emerged as a single face of divine power. During Babylonian exile, theologians doubled down on exclusive Yahwehism, rewriting history. So Yahweh has always been the Most High. So, yeah, and I have these quotes that they have. Like there's this one, Deuteronomy, it says, that was from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It said, Elyon divides nations among gods. Yahweh gets Israel. Suggests Yahweh was once a lower tier deity under El. Yeah, so it's pretty clear that this, yeah, Yahweh and El were one thing at a time, right? So what's the root of El and the word elites? El as divine root. In ancient Semitic languages, El meant God or mighty one. In the Canaanite pantheon, El was the high god, the father of gods, associated with authority, age, and kingship. Hebrew retained El in names. Israel, he struggles with El. Michael, who is El? Gabriel, strength of El. This root El is bound up with ideas of power, rulership, and divine authority. So how do we get from El to elite? English elite comes through French élite, meaning chosen or select. That French form comes from Latin, to choose, to select. So strictly in linguistics history, elite is tied to elegir, not directly to El. But here is the interesting part. The conceptual overlap between El and elite is striking. El is the supreme, the one above all others. Elite, the chosen few, separated from the many, above in power and rank. Even though linguistics trace elite to Latin, the archetypal association of El with the powerful ones gave spiritual weight to rulers and secret select classes. In biblical and Near Eastern texts, the son of El, or Elohim, the mighty, is the rulers, even divine beings. So while elite in English isn't etymologically from el, the resonance is clear. Both point to the high, the chosen, the ruling stratum. Political and religious implications. Ancient kings justified rule as being chosen by El, or bearing his authority. The priests and royal class were literally the elite of society, the sons of El. Over time, this embedded the idea that elites ruled not just by power, but by divine right. So the word elite officially comes from the Latin/French "élégir" equals chosen, but the concept of the elite, the few exalted above the many, echoes the old Canaanite Hebrew root El, the high God. Symbolically, the elites are those who claim the authority of El. So yeah, I've got all the explanation about why they say it happened, but yeah, so El. El became Yahweh, and El means these elites, right? So let me scroll down here. I've got all the Bible quotes. I believe this was all rigged up, right? Of course, they wrote the stuff to go along with the rigging, right? So Yahweh's inflation with El was a gradual merger. El equals a creator, patriarch, cosmic high god. Yahweh was a tribal storm war god. And over time, Yahweh absorbed El's titles like El Elon or El Shaddai. It also took over their roles, creator, patriarch. It also took over their consort with that Ashran person, which they later erased. So what was the result? Well, Yahweh became the supreme God of Israel, while rivals like Baal and Ashran were eliminated. Yahweh was not always the only God. He became the only God. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I think this is how the trick got going, right? Political elites, presidents, prime ministers, senators, cabinet officials, top bureaucrats, judges. Why are they considered elites? Well, they hold state power. They make laws and influence national global policies. Self-identification. They call themselves elites, right? I mean, I didn't make up the name. I don't think you did. Corporate elites, billionaires, CEOs of major corporations, tech giants, energy firms, Wall Street executives, private equity leaders. Why considered elites? Well, they control vast amounts of capital and resources. And I bet you if anybody took the time, like those people from Intel, all the people at the top are all going to connect with each other, right? So, and then we have the cultural and celebrity elites, the movie stars and all that. We have the academic and intellectual elites. It's funny how they call themselves that, right? They say, well, let's call in one of our experts and blah, blah, blah. So, well, let's take a look at the Bible. Um, many people, uh, many critics of power have described elites not just as privileged or corrupt, but as demonic forces serving something darker. So where does that show up? Well, in the Bible, rulers who abuse power are often equated with idolaters or demon worshippers. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah accused kings and priests of turning to false gods and leading the people astray. In apocalyptic writings like the Revelation, political and economic powers are described as beasts or Whore of Babylon, imagery tied to satanic rebellion. Historic associations, medieval and early modern Europe, rulers were accused of heresy, witchcraft, or secret pacts with the devil. Reformation, both Catholics and Protestants accused the other side's elites of being in league with Satan. Folk tradition, elites who hoarded wealth or exploited peasants were sometimes called servants of the devil. Terms like satanic elites or Luciferian rulers are used today in certain political and religious critiques. They frame elites as not just greedy or corrupt, but actively serving anti-human, anti-divine powers. This symbolism often comes up in discussions of child abuse scandals linked to institutions, secret societies like the Illuminati and Freemasonry, globalist meetings like Davos, Bilderberg, even hidden cult-like rituals. Even if not literal, calling elites demonic reflects how ordinary people experience power as predatory and inhuman. Elites appear to exploit, deceive, and sacrifice others for gain. In mythic terms, that behavior resembles Satan, the accuser, the deceiver, the devourer. One could say elites are demons who worship Satan as a symbolic truth. They operate like predatory powers, reversing moral order, feeding off the many for the few. Whether literal or more metaphorical, the imagery captures a sense of elites as aligned with forces hostile to humanity. Why are they considered elites? Well, because they operate across borders, influencing global finance, trade, and governance. Self-identification. They use terms like global leaders, stakeholders, partners. The word elite is usually what's called outsider language. Politicians, celebrities, and billionaires may be called elites, but very few actually call themselves that because it implies arrogance or distance from ordinary people. Instead, they frame themselves as servants, leaders, innovators, or influencers. So, in the Babylonian time, Hebrew prophets accused them of idolatry and of serving false gods that were framed as demons. And the example is Isaiah's taunts against the morning star, later interpreted as Satan. In the Roman emperors, early Christians described these Caesars as possessed by demons, ruling under Satan's authority. In Revelations, the beast is widely interpreted as Rome itself, an empire under Satan. And we had the feudal lords, popular uprisings often called ruling elites, servants of the devil, to their heavy taxation and corruption. We have the Knights Templar, 14th century, powerful order accused of worshiping Baphomet, a demon figure. Historians see these charges as politically motivated, but the association stuck in popular imagination. Then there was the Medicean Renaissance popes from 15th to 16th century. Rivals accused these popes of dabbling in necromancy, astrology, and demonology to maintain power. The papacy itself was called the seat of Satan by Protestant reformers. Then we have the early modern era, European monarchies, 16th century to 18th century, Catholics versus Protestants propaganda, accused kings and queens of being in league with Satan. For example, Elizabeth I was called the English Jezebel, while Catholic rulers were framed as antichrist figures. In the 17th century, they had the Salem and witch trials. Accusations targeted not just peasants, but wealthy landowners, reflecting fear that elites secretly consorted with demons. And of course, in the 19th century, Freemasons and secret societies, seen by both church authorities and populist critics as Luciferian. Anti-Masonic movements in the U.S. claimed elites were united in hidden satanic brotherhoods. There was the occult revival in the late 1800s. Figures like Aleister Crowley openly embraced Thelema and invoked satanic imagery. His aristocratic networks gave fuel to the image of elites experimenting with demon worship. Then we have the 20th century, the Nazi elites from the 1930s to 40s, the cult roots, and the SS included rituals around pagan gods, blood symbolism, and accusations of satanic inversions of Christianity. In the Cold War, the 50s to the 70s, both Soviet and Western elites were accused by their opponents of being satanic. In the U.S., counterculture writers tied the military-industrial complex to dark occultism. And also during the 70s, it was Iran called the U.S. Big Satan and Israel Little Satan, I think were the words. Then, of course, in the 80s and 90s, we had the Satanic Panic. Accusations of satanic ritual abuse targeted daycare centers, celebrities, and politicians that cemented the link between elites and hidden demonic cults in public imagination. And now, in the 20th century, 2000s to present, we have the World Economic Forum, Davos, and Bilderberg meetings, often cast as Luciferian gatherings. We've had the internet movements like QAnon popularize the idea of a Satan-worshipping elite cabal involved in trafficking and ritual sacrifice. Of course, there's the Epstein-Maxwell scandal, 2019 to present. Elite networks exposed in sex trafficking led many to frame them as demonic predators. Pop culture, 2000 to present. Celebrities accused of Illuminati symbolism, the eye, the pyramid, Baphomet hand signs, taken by some as proof of satanic allegiance. So, across history, elites have repeatedly been accused of demonic worship, sometimes as metaphor or corruption, sometimes as real suspicion of occult practice. Whether emperors, popes, bankers, or celebrities, the charge of serving Satan is a reoccurring way societies express fear and outrage at concentrated power. Why are they considered elites? Because they hold power, they make laws, and influence national global policies. So let me keep scrolling down here. Yeah, it's all of them, right? What they did was basically they took off their filthy gypsy clothes, they put on medals and business suits and got rid of those turbans and stuff and all that stuff, and they put on fancy robes, called themselves royalty, put on fancy uniforms with medals and called themselves military. So the word elite is usually outsider language. So I think they do call themselves that. I don't know that this is true outsider language personally, but okay. So let's get back to this El business. El in Canaanite religion. El equals the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon. Its attributes: patriarchal, ancient, remote, enthroned, father of gods, associated with time, authority, and judgment, qualities later tied to Saturn. Saturn as El. In the Greco-Roman world, Saturn, which is Kronos in Greek, was the father god of the Golden Age. Associated with harsh rule, devouring his children, time consuming all things. The planet Saturn equals slow, heavy, boundary setting, linked with death and law. Ancient synchronicity fueled El with Cronus and Saturn. So yeah, El and Cronus, Saturn, all this stuff connects. And they've even got people over in the Muslim world worshiping that cube. Saturn has its cube, the black cube symbols, Mecca, Masonic black cube, tied to Saturn as a god of control and boundaries. They have Saturn Day or Saturday, the seventh day, tied to the Sabbath and El. Crown Chronos, time and rulership. Elites invoke Saturn or El as the archetype of authority over cycles. Yahweh as the mask of El. Yahweh originally a storm war god, but when merged with El, he inherited Saturn's archetype, remote father, lawgiver, judge.
Over time, the elites wrapped themselves in Yahweh/L's authority to justify their divine right to rule. The trick: project Yahweh as the one true God while encoding Saturn L worship into hidden symbols, rituals, and power structures. In many traditions, Saturn equals El, the father god of time and authority. When elites invoke Yahweh or El, they cloak themselves in this ancient Saturnarian archetype. So, in a sense, Yahweh, as God's most high, was the perfect mask for elites to redirect worship back to El, Saturn, their true symbol of power, law, and control. Saturn equals Satan. Saturn was the Roman god of time, harvest, and harsh rule, which was Cronus in Greek. In esoteric tradition, Saturn's role as devourer of his children tied to death, limitation, and judgment. Phonetically, Saturn collapses into Satan in several languages and occult writings. Occultists call Saturn the dark sun or the hidden god, linked to Satan as the adversary. And then, of course, we have Santa Claus equals Satan. Santa Claus is an anagram of Satan. They just swap the letters around. Santa Claus wears red and white, colors tied to ritual sacrifice, also to Coca-Cola branding to reinforce the image. Flies in the sky. Santa flies around the sky, parallels to the prince of the power of the air. Ho, 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 echoes mocking laughter, inverted joy. Gifts, chimneys, omnipresent, he knows if you've been bad or good, mimic divine attributes, but in a commercialized, inverted form. Elites have long used double meanings. El equals God, but also elites, the exalted ones. Saturn equals Satan, adversary, dark lord. Santa to Satan child, focused ritual figure at winter solstice. The trick is hiding inversion in plain sight so that the masses celebrate what elites secretly encode as worship of Saturn or Satan. Holidays, logos, and cultural rituals often carry Saturn Satan symbolism. Christmas, Saturnalia reborn, Santa as Satan. Saturday, Saturn's Day, the true Sabbath in ancient calendars. Black cube, Saturn's cube in corporate elite symbolism. These patterns aren't accidental. They're part of the linguistic and symbolic shell game that redirects reverence back to Saturn or Satan. By twisting language and symbolism, elites code their worship of Saturn or Satan under cultural disguises, so people participate without even realizing what they're invoking. Just like that Baphomet is code word for baptize. So, also, I used to hear from people with a lot of, well, they said they knew a lot about religion, and I think it's because no one looks at the beginning, right? People would say things like, well, those of us in the know, we call it Yahweh. People who don't know much, they call it God. So I was kind of impressed by that because a couple of them actually sent me all these Bible quotes to convince me that the earth is flat. And I gotta tell you, some of that stuff was pretty convincing. So what happens is that it's really all about selective storytelling, right? Um, they tell these stories. So they use the same thing. In the Bible, they talk about war versus peace, rich versus poor, law versus grace, faith versus works. The Bible itself is structured as a mirror machine, so anyone quoting only one half can sound brilliant while hiding the contradictions. So yeah, because so when anyone comes to you with secret knowledge from the Bible, you'll know to ask this. Okay, well, what about the other side? what verses counter this, because the Bible is just written in two different distinct patterns, right? Everybody can argue about everything the way it's set up. So if you ask people the question like, okay, what about the other side? What verses counter this? Well, they'd be dumbfounded because people only learn one side, right? So, and Netanyahu has quoted from the scriptures, most notably invoking the archetype enemy, Amalek, Amalek. I didn't know what he was talking about because in late October 2023, as Israel launched a ground operation in Gaza, Netanyahu told the soldiers, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you," echoing a biblical call for vengeance rooted in the book of 1 Samuel. Also, again, in May of 2024, while responding to the ICC accusations, Netanyahu invoked the same reference again, framing it as a moral battle against Israel's enemies. Have you ever noticed how paranoid these people are to sound? But anyway, so how did they get this trick going? Well, actually, that Scofield Bible. I did a whole show about it, but I wasn't connecting some of these dots, so I'll connect them now. There's a man named Cyrus I. Scofield and the birth of Christian Zionism, the man behind the Bible. Cyrus Ingersoll Scofield, 1843 to 1921, was not a traditional theologian. He was a lawyer by trade. His background included fraud, forgery, and jail time before he had a claimed conversion in the 1870s. But despite no theological training, he rose quickly in evangelical circles, aided by connections to Dwight L. Moody and exposure to John Nelson Darby's dispensation teachings on prophecy and the rapture. By 1909, Scofield had published the Scofield Reference Bible, a study Bible whose notes carried such weight that they functioned as doctrine for generations of American Protestants. The real puzzle is how a relatively unknown preacher landed the prestige of Oxford University Press as his publisher. Researchers point to the role of Zionist-connected financiers, particularly Samuel Untermyer, a powerful Jewish lawyer and political figure in New York. Untermyer and others saw Scofield as a useful instrument, a malleable preacher whose Bible commentary could inject Zionist theology into American Protestantism. The Scofield Bible success was not accidental. It was promoted, financed, and distributed on a scale unusual for its time. And this Untermyer person later became famous for organizing the U.S. boycott of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. His influence in the early 1900s helped secure Scofield's platform and position him as a mouthpiece for Christian support of Jewish restoration in Palestine. This wasn't thousands of years ago. Scofield's notes did not just explain scripture, they reframed it. Among his key teachings, Jews remain God's chosen people eternally. Christians must support Israel to receive God's blessing. The return of Jews to Palestine is a biblical certainty. The rapture will remove Christians before Israel's tribulation. This was a radical theological pivot. Instead of focusing Christianity on Christ's universal teachings, Scofield pushed an Israel-centered prophetic narrative that cast modern Jews and the land of Israel as a centerpiece of God's unfolding plan. The influence of Scofield's Bible extended beyond pews. It reshaped seminaries and pulpits. The Dallas Theological Seminary, 1924, was founded explicitly on Scofield's dispensationalism. Its graduates turned Scofield's notes into a modern prophecy industry. By the late 20th century, networks like TBN and Daystar had turned Scofield's theology into mass entertainment. And these people are just wild. They have, today, Zionist-oriented preachers are essentially Scofield's heirs. There is this one guy, John Hagee, Christians United for Israel, preaches Scofield's Israel-centric prophecies almost word for word. There's these people that run this group called Daystar. They pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They echo Scofield's framing of Israel as prophecy fulfilled. There's this other group, Jonathan Cahn, Harry Stone, David Jeremiah, Paula White. I think Paula White is the woman who's supposedly the preacher with Trump. They all stand in Scofield's tradition, reading prophecy through the lens of Israel's restoration. They even use worship music that merges Yahweh with Israel, Zion imagery, reflecting Scofield's framework translated into pop culture. These Daystar people, boy, they're something else. And they run a big Christian network. I recognize the logo. I did a kind of a deep dive into them a few months back. They had this big scandal going. I'll just tell you briefly. There's these people called the Lamb, L-A-M-B family, and Marcus Lamb and his wife started this Daystar thing, okay? And it's this big church thing. All the big crooked preachers are part of there. That guy that does the all these mega church people, the guy with the big teeth, Joel Osteen, all those people are part of this Daystar thing. So anyway, so long story short, what happened was that Marcus Lamb, the husband, died. Well, I think the wife killed him, but I'm just guessing here, okay? But anyway, so Marcus dies suddenly, and the wife then marries somebody else in their network, some other preacher in the network, and that throws this big thing into confusion. And then one of the kids is married to this guy who was creeping around on one of the kids, and they think he was a molester. Yeah, so they covered that all up. They even gave the suspected pedo a code name. So yeah, last I checked, Marcus is still dead, and the wife is still married to the other guy. And I guess I don't know. It's a big mess. But these people, they're making just the Daystar people alone, 150 or so $1 million minimum. Okay, minimum. And the preachers on their channels are really zapping into stuff. But so anyway, so they're all part of this pushing the Scofield deal. And this Daystar thing, it's Jonathan and Susie Lamb were the son and daughter-in-law of Joni and the late Marcus. They alleged that their 5-year-old daughter was molested by a family member and Daystar employee referred to as Pete. They claim the abuse occurred in 2020 to 2021, and the network's leadership attempted to cover it up. So yeah, they say that Jonathan discovered Pete with their naked daughter. They contacted Marcus. They contacted Marcus and Joni. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just like a soap opera, right? According to them, rather than report to authorities, the couple insisted on internal spiritual handling and lacked concern for the child's welfare. Yeah, it's a big deal. And they actually got a police investigation, but there was insufficient evidence to do anything. So after Marcus Lamb's death in 2021, his wife, Joni Lamb, married Dr. Doug Weiss, a sex therapist and Daystar host, in 2023. This marriage deepened the rift within the Lamb family. Yeah, and then Jonathan refused to sign a non-disclosure, and the family conflict grew from there. Yeah, so the fallout was pretty big. That Joyce Meyer woman, people, the preachers they have on this channel, you'll recognize them all. Yeah, Joyce Meyer seems to have left the channel. Some of them have left, but not all of them. So these are the good Christians pushing this Israel owns that lamb due to biblical things, right? So I don't believe for a second that Israel owned that land because that land because they basically, when they came up with this Scofield Bible, what they did, the divine name was hidden, replaced with Lord, then confused with Jehovah, then they used Yahweh. So yeah, and then they claim that Yahweh was like finding a lost truth. Well, really, it's just a big confusing mess, right? So, because people think they are invoking the true God by saying Yahweh. In reality, the name itself is the product of substitutions and edits. El to Yahweh, to Adoni, to Jehovah. And that gives them false confidence. Instead of asking where the name came from or how it was preserved, people assume their translation equals eternal truth. So there's this theory of called accusations in a mirror, and what it is Satan's trick of convincing people they already know God when directing them toward a distorted image. So it's the same people who quote verses to show their supposed enlightenment. So they don't realize original manuscripts don't line up with their modern translation. They don't realize the name God has been edited, substituted, and rebranded many times. So they end up spreading half-truths packaged as certainty, one of the oldest tricks in the book. The devil's best trick isn't open rebellion. It's convincing people they already understand God by parroting verses while hiding the fact that the very words have been twisted by elites for thousands of years. Here's the irony nobody wants to face. People think they're honoring God by praying to the name Yahweh, but they don't realize that name itself is the product of substitution, edits, and mistranslation that go back thousands of years. First it was El, then Yahweh, then Adoni, then Jehovah, each layer another mask. And behind those masks was Saturn. And Saturn in the ancient world was always the shadow god, the devourer, the archetype of Satan himself. So while people believe they're lifting prayers to the Most High, in reality, they may be invoking the very adversary, because the devil's smartest trick is not to get you to reject God, but to convince you that you already know him when all you've been given is a counterfeit name. And let's take a look at this Bible as mirror language. They say that a lot of dual messages. The earth has four corners, could mean flat earth. The earth is a circle, well, could mean it's a round earth. These aren't mistakes. They create tension, polarity, and duality. Each side can then argue God's truth from the same text. Division as a feature, not a bug. Built-in pro and con makes the Bible a machine for endless argument. Instead of clarity, it provokes debate, sex, and schisms. Keeps people chasing proof, never questioning who sets the game rules. Every issue contains both pro and con. For every movement, a counter movement. For every prophecy, a counter prophecy. The point is not truth, but division and distraction. If God is truth, truth should be whole. But the elite system maintains control by giving both light and shadow. The people fight over interpretations while the system itself remains hidden. The fact that the Bible contains built-in pro and cons on major questions, this isn't random. It reflects a larger control strategy. Scripture, like politics today, is structured as mirrors and opposites to keep people divided, distracted, and locked in debate, never realizing the deeper trick at play. The Bible is not a scientific text, but it uses poetic, symbolic, and ancient cosmetology language. Because of this, people can and do pull verses to argue for both a flat earth and a round earth. There's a category for violence versus peace, pro-violence. Thus says the Lord, go and strike Amalek, and devour and devote to destruction all that they have. This is conquest narratives in Joshua to wipe out the Canaanites. Then there's another pro-peace. Thou shalt not kill, Exodus 20:13. Blessed are the peacemakers, Matthew 5:9. Wealth versus poverty. There's a section about pro-wealth. Abraham, Solomon, and Job blessed with riches as signs of God's favor. The blessings of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. But then there's a pro-poverty side. Blessed are you who are poor, for you are the kingdom of God. Jesus warns you cannot serve both God and money. Then we have another dual one under law and grace. There's one for pro-law. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter will by any means disappear from the law. Matthew. Then they have one for pro-grace. Oh, sorry, I got the microphone wrong. I hope you can hear me, but anyway, so they have one for pro-grace that's against the law. We are not under the law, but under grace, and that's in Romans 6:14. Paul repeatedly dismisses Torah observations as unnecessary for salvation. And we have the universalism versus exclusivity. Pro-exclusivity. I am the Lord, and there is no other. No one comes to the Father except through me. And then the pro-universalism. God desires all people to be saved. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Everything is divided up. They have it divided up between free will and predestination. Pro-predestination. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Pro-free will. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whoever believes in him not perish, but have eternal life. Then they broke it up between God seen and God unseen. The Lord appeared to Abraham. Then there's the other one. No one has ever seen God. You cannot see my face, for no one may see me. Yeah, everything is split right down the middle. Wisdom versus foolishness. For pro-wisdom, they have Proverbs. Wisdom is the highest pursuit. And then they have something for pro-foolishness. God choose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. Salvation by works versus salvation by faith. The code for salvation by works. Faith without work is dead. Jesus, if you want eternal life, keep the commandments. And salvation by faith. For by grace you have been saved through faith, not by works. Everything is like split to both sides. The Bible presents both sides on nearly every major theological or cosmic question. Peace versus war, wealth versus poverty, law versus grace, exclusivity versus universality, free will versus predestination, seeing God versus not seeing God, wisdom versus foolishness, works versus faith. The text functions as a mirror system. For every doctrine, there's a counter doctrine. That structure keeps people divided and debating endlessly instead of seeing the larger tricks behind it. Because it can have selective biases. They pick verses that support their angle. Quoting scriptures carries weight, especially when dropped rapid fire. Omissions of the other side. They don't mention verses that contradict it. By hiding half the picture, they frame themselves as a one with insider knowledge. Psychological impact. If you're the listener and you don't know the other verses, it feels overwhelming. You get bowled over, impressed, pressured, or even shamed into thinking they must be right. The trick in action. It's not teaching, it's weaponizing the text. People don't give you the whole counsel of Scripture. They're running a control tactic. This mirrors politics, media, and religion today. One side pushes its half of the story. The counter side pushes the other half. The audience is caught in the fight, never realizing both halves were planted there to keep them arguing. So anyone can bowl you over with Bible quotes if they only show one face of the mirror. But the deeper truth is that the Bible itself is structured with built-in opposites. The real trick is the verse they show you, is the verse they don't show you. Scofield's Bible merged U.S. Protestantism with political Zionism decades before the modern founding of Israel in 1948. It created the theological foundation for Christian Zionism by embedding Yahweh's covenant into everyday Bible reading. Before Scofield, U.S. churches were skeptical of Jewish resettlement in Palestine. After Scofield, millions of Protestants saw support for Israel as a divine command. Without Scofield, movements like CUFI, Daystar, and the Yahweh branded Zionist preaching industry would lack their theological backbone. Scofield's 1909 and 1917 editions already promoted Jewish restoration long before a state of Israel existed. Did you hear me? Scofield's 1909-1917 editions already promoted Jewish restoration long before a state of Israel existed. After 1947, Oxford Press revised and expanded the notes. By 1967, following the Six-Day War, editions were further making criticism of Israel was tantamount to sin. This ensured that Israel was not just a state, it was sacralized. In this narrative, Israel itself became an object of worship, elevated above nations and even above Christ in some circles of prophecy teaching. The Scofield Bible made Yahweh, the covenant God of Israel, the central figure in modern evangelical theology. By stressing Yahweh's promises to Abram, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes as eternal, unconditioned covenants, Scofield reframed God's story around national Israel rather than universal faith. This shifted Protestant thought. Yahweh's covenant became the measure of prophecy, not the moral teachings of Jesus. In effect, Scofield nationalized Christianity, binding it to Israel's fate. Critics argue the Scofield reference Bible was less about faith and more about religious power engineering. It reframed Christianity to justify Zionist political projects. It provided a theological engine for U.S. foreign policy alignment with Israel. It reorientated Protestant devotion around Yahweh's covenant with Israel, sidelining Universalist readings of the gospel. While Scofield's Bible was Protestant, it paralleled the Vatican centuries-long control of biblical canon, but shaped theology to ensure Yahweh's dominance as the official covenant God, embedding Israel's divine right into Western religious consciousness. The Scofield Reference Bible was not a neutral study aid. It was a project of theological and political reprogramming. Scofield himself, a dubious figure, elevated beyond his station. Financing, backed by Zionist-connected elites like Samuel Uttermeyer. Theology, it reframed around Yahweh, an eternal Jewish covenant. Legacy, from Dallas Seminary to TBN, Daystar, and Con, the Scofield Bible is the foundational stone of today's Christian Zionist movement. In short, Scofield's notes hardwired Zionism into American Christianity, making Yahweh's covenant promises to Israel the core of prophecy, politics, and popular religion. So, and this deal about Netanyahu invoking Amalek. So he's really trying to, Amalek innovation means enemies cast as eternal evil or outside compromise. So the Scofield made the shift. Land was reframed from conditional covenant to unconditional deed. So they just always repeat this stuff. They always say, oh, it's 4,000 years ago. And once politics is wrapped in biblical canons, compromise becomes not possible, right? So that's Amalek. Amalek is an eternal enemy cursed by God, annihilation required. So Netanyahu in October 2023 speech put Hamas in this slot. So it erases the shades of gray. Then Israel becomes chosen. And then the adversary is Amalek, which is the extermination. So the Scofield rewiring, pro-Scofield, land was conditional covenant. Exile was possible. Occupation was tied to justice. Post-Scofield, land equals eternal deed. No conditions. Presence equal prophecy. U.S. evangelists tie salvation history to Israeli borders. Politicians echo it to secure the evangelist base. So it's pretty clear the elevated into monotheism after exile. Yeah. So Scofield and Christian Zionism, Yahweh became a rallying cry for divine property rights. It hides the violent, exclusive roots of this deity behind the aura of universality. I can't say that word. Universality. There, I got it. For believers, it feels like prophecy unfolding before their eyes. For politicians, it provides a sacred shield against criticism. Questioning land claims equals questioning God. For Netanyahu, it means elevates him from prime minister to guardian of biblical destiny. So, yeah, I think that it's all a pretty big trick, right? They just keep repeating it. Well, 4,000 years ago, people were here and they gave us this land. No, they didn't give them that land. What they did was they cooked all this up under the Scofield deal, right? So that rewritten Bible isn't just a text, it's an operating system that programs believers into treating land claims as divine. It programs politicians into defending those claims as strategic. It programs critics into silence, the fear of being anti-Bible or anti-Jewish. It's the ultimate feedback loop of power. It's true because I said it. How do I know? Because I referenced it myself in chapter 7. And chapter 7 is true because I said it back in chapter 3. And that's exactly how it works. I was watching these religious people. Everybody's finding religious now. Tucker, Rogan, they're all becoming Christians, right? And this one guy, Tucker was acting like he was really questioning things. So he asked this guy, well, how do you really know this part of the Bible is true? Well, what do you mean, how do I really know? I mean, several people wrote about it. Luke, John, they all wrote about it. So that's a circular firing squad, right? So if anybody questions people, they say, yeah, well, a lot of people wrote about it. Well, wait a minute. Who were those people? Luke, John? Well, those people were people that, I don't know, where'd they come from? How'd they write this? Did they write it on a clay tablet? Did they write it with a pencil or a pen? Did they use a ballpoint pen? I mean, how'd they write about it? So, right. So how the self-citation Bible works. Scripture is land promises, patriarchy names like Amalek. And then you have all the commentary and the reinforcements. Critics are told, see, it's confirmed by both the Bible and the commentators. So when you pull back the curtain on Cyrus Scofield, it looks a lot less like divine revelation and a lot more like a con man shaping global politics with footnotes. So Scofield, the man, he was convicted of fraud and forgery in the late 1870s. He left his wife and children and was arrested for forgery in Kansas. He has a questionable conversion story, later reinvented himself as a minister. So, published the Scofield's Reference Library. It wasn't a new Bible, it was a commentary in the margin. But people began reading his interpretations as if they were Scripture itself. That commentary made Israel's land promises unconditional, eternal, and geopolitical. Provided Jews must return to Palestine for prophecy, shifted Protestant imagination from symbolic and spiritual to promised land, to a literal territorial deed. It was backed by the Oxford University Press, equals global prestige. It was circulated by American Bible societies for mass distribution. It fit perfectly into the early 20th century Zionism and British imperial policy in Palestine. Most mainstream Protestants before 1900s read the Promised Land symbolically as spiritual inheritance, not a geopolitical map. The Israel of prophecy was often understood as a church, not a modern state. Land promises were seen as conditional, tied to covenant faithfulness, not eternal entitlement. Cyrus Scofield publishes his reference Bible with the Oxford Press. There was a root shift. He takes scattered verses and builds a new system. Each dispensation was a different way God relates to humanity. It was, we are in the church age, but prophecy requires Jews to return to Palestine. Land becomes an unconditional, eternal title deed. This is not how Christians read the Bible for centuries. It was a theological mutation. Mass production. Oxford pushed the Scofield Bible hard. American timing, early 20th century revivalism, and Zionist lobby, fertile soil. Imperial alignment, it matched the British goals in the Middle East with the Balfour Declaration of 1917. The result, a French theory, became mainstream because it served both religious hunger, prophecy excitement, and political needs, colonial foothold in Palestine. So when Netanyahu says Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 4,000 years, or when evangelic networks say support Israel equals obey God, they're not repeating ancient orthodoxy. They're repeating Scofield's reframing, a 20th century innovation layered on top of much older text. Scofield was actually served in the Confederate Army during the U.S. Civil War. Gee, a key time here when they were taking over, right? After he became a lawyer in Kansas, he was appointed the U.S. District Attorney for Kansas by President Ulysses S. Grant, but had to resign amid scandal. Scofield, writing this book, did anybody pay attention to anything? Scofield, one of his biggest claims was forgery and fraud. He was accused of forging signatures and misusing funds. His first wife, from a prominent St. Louis Catholic family, divorced him in 1881, citing desertion. Reports claim Scofield spent time in jail for forgery, though records are disputed. Alcoholism, persistent struggles with alcohol even after his conversion. Around 1879, Scofield claimed a dramatic evangelic conversion. He adopted John Nelson Darby's dispensationalism, dividing history into ages and emphasizing Jewish restoration to Palestine. Leveraging his legal skills, Scofield crafted the Scofield Reference Bible, 1909, embedding Zionist dispensationary theology directly into the biblical text through commentary notes. And I put a link to that show down below, I think. And that also around that time in this country, 54 was when the CIA had already invaded most of the churches here. So anyway, so embedding Zionist theology directly into the biblical text through commentary notes. That's exactly what he did. Scofield's Bible was published by the New York branch of Oxford University Press, an extraordinary opportunity for an obscure preacher. Prominent financiers, particularly Samuel Uterman, a Zionist lawyer and political figure, reportedly supported Scofield. Oxford's promotion and distribution turned the Scofield Bible into a bestseller, ensuring its place in American Protestant homes. The Scofield Bible was more than commentary. It was a tool of theological reprogramming. Jews as eternally God's chosen people, return to Palestine as biblical inevitable. Christians are obligated to support Israel. Rapture theology popularized for the masses. The Scofield Bible's long-term effects, the Dallas Theological Seminary, 1924, institutionalized Scofield's theology. Even modern worship music, Yahweh, Israel, Zion, reflects Scofield's theological architecture. So, in an interview with I-24 News, Netanyahu described his mission as both historic and spiritual. He tied Israel's territorial claims, West Bank, Gaza, Golan Heights, to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed for nearly 4,000 years. The land of Israel has been the homeland of the Jewish people. It's always been our home. It will always be our home. This framing merges politics with theology. Israel's borders as covenant land, divinely guaranteed. So, I would have to say that I'm going to put this on hold for a second here. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this. So let me try to go through here. So Netanyahu's 4,000-year covenant rhetoric mirrors the big lie. It did not happen 4,000 years ago. A falsehood so large that people assume it must be true because no one would dare invent it. Repetition makes his claim function as common sense, even when evidence is thin. Just as Europeans misidentified the Romani people as Egyptians or Gypsies, I don't think they were misidentified. They were from that region, but let me keep reading here, okay? Because this is where it gets really, really interesting. So they claim that Europeans misidentified the Romani people as Egyptians or Gypsies. Political and religious elites misrepresented Israel's history. Egyptians themselves tied monuments to divine authority. Later, colonial powers rewrote the narrative to fit biblical framework. The Gypsies or the Romanis adopted Egyptian identity to survive. The myth became entrenched in European consciousness. Both examples show how storytelling replaces primary evidence, embedding myths as unquestioned history. So remember, the Gypsies were over there first in Egypt, right? So now Israel is claiming that it is a biblical right, 4,000-year divine covenant. The land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed for nearly 4,000 years. The land of Israel has become the homeland of the Jewish people. So borders then be cast as sacred. Negotiations become sacrilege. Yeah, Scofield's doctrine reappears in modern politics, a blend of myth and nationalism. So yeah, and then you got this pagan roots, right? Um, and there's this theory called accusations in a mirror. It's close to what I've been talking about, how psychopaths will always claim that they're the victim. This accusations in a mirror is defined by the UN Office on Genocide Prevention. It's called the tactic. It accuses an adversary of the very crimes or intentions that one harbors. The purpose justifies aggression as self-defense. That's seen in Rwanda, Holocaust propaganda, and Armenian genocides. And when it's applied to U.S. foreign policy, the claim is we must attack to prevent terrorism. And the reality is bombing, drone strikes, regime changes breed terrorism and instability. The claim, well, they threaten world peace. The reality is U.S. interventions destabilize regions far from home. The claim, we fight for democracy. The reality, many interventions prop up dictators or undermine elected leaders. By labeling others first, the U.S. preemptively framed itself as a defender while practicing aggression, a textbook accusations in a mirror strategy. So let's take a look. The war in World War II, the only war where somebody came out a victim, and that would be the Jews. Most people don't know this. Total World War II deaths, 70 to 85 million people. The Soviet Union took the biggest hit of all. The Soviets, those Russians that everybody's claiming they hate now, they lost 27 million people. China lost 20 million people. Germany lost 7 million people. The Jewish Holocaust, 6 million. Poland, 3 million. Japan, 3 million. And the Roma gypsies, less than 500,000. Let's put this into perspective. The Jewish deaths equals about 8% of the total, yet Holocaust remembrance dominates legal, education, and cultural frameworks in the West. Holocaust denial is criminalized in Europe. Denial of other mass killings, the Holodomor, the Armenian genocide, Mao's famine, and the gulags are not criminalized. Holocaust education is mandatory in many countries. Soviet, Chinese, or colonial atrocities receive far less attention. The UN has International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th. No equivalent for Soviet or Chinese civilian losses. Strong post-war Jewish advocacy networks, founding of Israel directly tied to Holocaust memory. Western geopolitical alignment with Israel, cultural dominance of Holocaust narratives in media and education. Especially when you consider the millions more that China and Russia lost ahead of anybody else. Where's a special day to remember all those Russians or all those Chinese? Well, because this is all a script. Myth, memory, and political power. The Bible is much like a film script. Biblical texts are compiled, edited, and mythologized from earlier pagan stories to serve political and religious goals. There's the anchoring effect. Just as children grow up believing the earth is 4.5 billion years old because textbooks and media repeat it, religious political myths become locked in by repetition. The Romanis were called Egyptians or gypsies due to appearance and strategic self-identification. A false origin stuck for centuries, showing how myths replace facts. Yeah, the Romanis, those gypsies, no written history, traveling all around, really from Egypt. Come on, they were from Egypt. They're Egyptians, gypsies. The pyramids. Where is the biggest crazy lie of all? Well, those pyramids. Pharaohs and later colonial powers reframed monuments as eternal markers of divine power, reinforcing political myths as history. Yeah, those pyramids, just like those houses. How did they get all of those parts to build those pyramids? Well, they really didn't, right? It is not physically possible that those people back then built those pyramids. So we had the Scofield Bible, a Zionist-backed project that rewrote Protestant theology into a political roadmap for Israel. Netanyahu, a modern inheritor of that tradition, framing borders as sacred covenants. Both Israel and the U.S. deploy the accusations in a mirror tactics, labeling others aggressive while justifying their own actions. The Holocaust memory, unique, legal, educational focus, reflects post-war Jewish influence and Israel's geopolitical role, even while larger death tolls remain marginalized. They turn pagan myths redacted into the Bible, into canonized in Scofield's Zionist framework. It was weaponized in modern geopolitics, shielded by selective memory and education. The biblical right claim is less history than myth. Its endurance lies not in fact, but its power as a repeated narrative, reinforced by theology, politics, and propaganda until it feels unquestionable. I'm going to put this on hold. I need to come back to the biggest, most important part. The Bible as the biggest lie in history, the Vatican's hidden collections. Hang on to that thought. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, well, I hope you can start to see where this is going here, right? We got the fake pyramids. We got the Egyptians who were calling themselves gypsies. Yahweh was an Egyptian deity. Nothing suspicious about any of this stuff so far, right? Okay, I'll keep reading. The Vatican's hidden collections. The Vatican Library. 75,000 manuscripts. 1.6 million printed books and 8,000 plus early printed works. Its manuscript department holds 80,000 codices in Latin, Greek, and Oriental languages. The Vatican Archives, formerly called the Secret Archives, 85 kilometers or 50 miles of shelving, holding 150,000 documents, including state papers, papal correspondence, and early Christian writings. Restricted areas, documents after 1938 were only opened in 2020. Many earlier works remain unseen by the public. Now, isn't that convenient? By 2020, I imagine they had most of their own people in charge, right? So, yeah, you can come in and look at the works because you're one of us, right? So, unreleased manuscripts, no confirmed number. Discoveries like erased Syriac versions of Matthew show that hidden or suppressed textual variants still surface. Withholding manuscripts allows church authorities to control biblical canon and discourage challenges to official theology. So, I think it was a pretty good trick. Do we know what they have? No, they say they have these things, right? They really could have nothing, right? Zip. Nada. They claim they're hiding all this stuff, or they're holding it, right? Because we can't be trusted with it, right? So, yeah, so it was a pretty easy trick. They just divided history into eras, and that's how they got that Scofield Bible going. It had those footnotes. Everything, oh, this is official. It's part of the Bible, right? So, yeah, things just went clicking along from that point, and now today, 4,000 years ago, we were given this land. Now give it back to us. So, yeah, so here's how it all started out. 600 to 200 BCE, the Hebrew Bible was compiled from multiple oral written traditions. 325 CE, Council of Nicaea decides official canon. 525 CE, something invents a BC AD system. 1582 CE, Georgian reform alters the calendar. Yeah, that was another big one. they dropped 10 days off the calendar, and that had to do with well, something fishy. It had to do with being able to line up when Jesus really died or not. So they went in and they reformed the Georgian calendar. And then, of course, 1948 CE, we had the founding of Israel, reframed as biblical prophecy fulfilled. Religion, politics, and timekeeping have been repeatedly edited together, history written, erased, or shifted by those in power. And where do we get that reinforcement? Well, we got that reinforcement by a lot of books and movies and stuff, right? We had all these books. I have every single one of them listed down below because we got these Exodus ones from Moses and the Red Sea, the Ten Commandments, the Prince of Egypt, Noah's flood, David and Goliath, Jesus' life and crucifixion, Joshua's genocide and canon. Yeah, got really a lot of them, right? So, Hollywood and TV retell safe narratives, reinforcing a selective canon. For many, their Bible is actually what they've seen on the screen. Moses, David, Jesus, Paul, while difficult or violent texts are forgotten. This selective repetition functions like propaganda, embedding a streamlined version of the Bible into cultural memory. So why does the Bible still work? Well, it's woven into Western law, art, and morality. Question it risks alienation. It has the authority claim. They label it God's word, making doubt dangerous for believers. Of course, we have the storytelling power, the hero's journey, epic trials, moral clarity, and the same techniques that make blockbusters succeed. Institutional control. The Vatican and Protestant publishers curated and restricted which texts survived, which were erased, and which became orthodox. The Bible may be the biggest lie in history. Bible. Not because its stories are worthless, but because it blends pagan myths into a new theological political framework. It was politically edited across centuries to consolidate power. Scofield and others weaponized its commentary to align faith with Zionist geopolitics. The Vatican still holds manuscripts controlling access to source material. Hollywood and the media reinforce a curated, simplified canon that obscures complexity. And what's the result? A text born from myth, reshaped by councils, financed by elites, and sanctified by media, has become an unassailable truth, even as archaeology, history, and textual criticism shows its human-made origins. So, I think it was a major, major trick in what they did. Then they came up with the Talmud, the human interpretation of divine revelation. And that function of the Talmud, which is a pretty crazy thing about the Talmud, it explains how to live Yahweh's Torah in daily life. For Orthodox Judaism, as binding as the Bible itself, some passages reflect ancient cultural norms like marriages and ages that are disturbing today. Critics weaponize these passages, while rabbinic defenders stress they were legal hypotheticals, not moral endorsements. So yeah, I think that it just got now. Did it happen last week in the 1700s, or did it happen thousands of years ago? Well, I would say it happened just a few hundred years ago. But the only reason that I'm sharing my work is so that you could thinky for yourself. When do you think it happened? What do you think happened about Iraq? Interesting thing about Iraq was was supposedly the claim of where all this Bible stuff was started. So was that the reason why they blew up Iraq so badly? Could be. Wars are also about hiding death and creating trauma, right? So essentially what this says is that we are a trauma-driven society, and I'm going to take a break here, and I'm going to be playing, well, let me see here, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm going to play this clip now. It's called Duck and Cover because this also talks into the fragmented minds. This Duck and Cover was run through the 50s up until the 70s. And what it was that they were duck and cover film released by the Federal Civil Defense. And it was shown in schools, theaters, and community centers. It featured Bert the Turtle teaching children to duck and cover at the flash of an atomic bomb. And it was done in the 50s through regular school campaigns. It was done through the 60s, and it was done up until the late 60s, the decline of duck and cover. Civil defense moves toward fallout shelters, evacuation planning in advance. So for the first years, they didn't have any fallout shelters. Well, they really still don't, right? Because that is all a big trick, right? But what happened in the 60s was public skepticism grows. Many recognize that crouching under a desk won't save you from a nuclear blast. So what I'd like you to pay attention to when you listen to this clip is just think about being a little kid yourself, right? You're in school, you got these teachers and stuff, and they're constantly playing these movies and stuff, and we never know where they're going to have these drills. And this is all about traumatizing people. And really, the more you get people traumatized, the more you get them to believe all these big lies, right? Because then they become timid and all kinds of things. So let's play that clip now.
Dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and cover, ducked and cover.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you
and you, duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association. Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people, please. Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. Fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. But we are ready for fires. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire, and you have fire drills in your school so you know what to do. Automobiles can be dangerous, too. They sometimes cause bad accidents, but we are ready. We have safety rules that car drivers and people who are walking must obey. Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you are not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. In Betty's school, they are talking about the atomic bomb, too. Betty is asking her teacher, how can we tell when the atomic bomb may explode? And her teacher is explaining that there are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning. We think that most of the time we will be warned before the bomb explodes, so there will be time for us to get into our homes, schools, or some other safe place. Our civil defense workers and our men in uniform will do everything they can to warn us before enemy planes can bring a bomb near us. You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be. You might be out playing at home when the warning comes. Then be sure to get into the house fast, where your parents have fixed a safe place for you to go. If you are not close to home when you hear the warning, go to the nearest safe cover. Know where you are to go, or ask an older person to help you. You know the places marked with the S sign? They're safe places to go when you hear the alarm. If there is a warning, you will hear it before the bomb explodes. But sometimes, and this is very, very important, sometimes the bomb might explode without any warning. Then the first thing we would know about it would be the flash. And that means duck and cover fast, wherever you are. There's no time to look around or wait. Be like Bert. When there is a flash, duck and cover, and do it fast. Here are some older boys showing what to do if the flash comes when you are not in the classroom. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. You duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. Getting ready means we will all have to be able to take care of ourselves. The bomb might explode when there are no grown-ups near. Paul and Patty know this, and they're always ready to take care of themselves. Here they are on their way to school on a beautiful spring day. But no matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know what to do. Paul covered the back of his head so that he wouldn't be burned, and Patty covered herself with the coat she was carrying. They knew how to duck and cover. They acted right away when the flash came. If they had been at this doorway when the bomb flashed, Paul and Patty would have ducked and covered this way, like this girl. Heavy doorways are a good place to duck and cover. She will be safer, too. Here's Tony going to his Cub Scout meeting. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. He is ready for it. Duck and cover. Attaboy, Tony. That flash means act fast. Tony knows that it helps to get to any kind of cover. This wall was close by, so that's where he ducked and covered. Tony knew what to do. Notice how he keeps from moving or from getting up and running? He stays down until he is sure the danger is over. The man helping Tony is a civil defense worker. His job is to help protect us when there is danger of the atomic bomb. We must obey the civil defense worker. We must know how to duck and cover in the school bus or in any other bus or streetcar. Duck and cover. Don't wait. Duck away from the windows fast. The glass may break and fly through the air and cut you. Sundays, holidays, vacation time, we must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover. This family knows what to do, just as your own family should. They know that even a thin cloth helps protect them. Even a newspaper can save you from a bad burn. But the most important thing of all is to duck and cover yourself, especially where your clothes do not cover you. No matter where we live, in the city or the country, we must be ready all the time for the atomic bomb. Duck and cover. That's the first thing to do. Duck and cover. The next important thing to do after that is to stay covered until the danger is over. Yes, we must all get ready now so we know how to save ourselves if the atomic bomb ever explodes near us. If you do not know just what to do, ask your teacher when this film is over. Discuss what you could do in different places if a bomb explodes. Older people will help us as they always do, but there might not be any grown-ups around when the bomb explodes. Then, you're on your own.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
Duck and cover. Duck and cover. Duck and cover.
Okay, we're just about wrapped up here. So the purpose of this duck and cover was really for fear management, right? It was shown for 20 years, from 1951 to the early 70s. And that created a generation of American school children, us boomers, who were raised with a constant backdrop of nuclear dread. It was for fear management. It provided a symbolic solution to nuclear terror, calming mass panic. They told kids they could survive without adults, making them less at stick emotionally, or actually more terrified. Right? When you're at school, you're on your own, nobody's around. Duck, cover. So a propaganda tool. It framed nuclear readiness as patriotic, embedding Cold War ideology into daily life. Yes, kids, be part of the war effort. Now duck under those desks. Control of panic. Better to have citizens practicing drills than questioning the U.S. nuclear policy. So we can see by this duck and cover thing that every opportunity leads for them as a new way to further traumatize us, right? Because it has a lot of connections, because the message is you can't stop the bomb, but you can obey instructions. And they connect that to World War II roots, borrowed from earlier propaganda films like Why We Fight and The Triumph of the Will. Cold War narratives, films like Duck and Cover, and later Red Dawn. And then we had Rocky films reinforce enemy at the gate psychology. Fear as social glue, like biblical narratives of wrath and salvation. The drills fuse existential fear with obedience to authority. Millions of children grew up with nuclear anxiety, normalized through school drills. Duck and cover endures in languages as a metaphor for futile safety measures. Just as the Bible offered salvation from divine wrath, duck and cover offered salvation from atomic wrath, both symbolic, both fear-driven, both conditioning populations into obedience. So, I'm going to scroll down here. I've got more information than you would ever want to take a look at. It's always how we also get the modern framing from the Bible stuff, right? It's always about good guy versus bad guys, right? They had in Iraq, Bush's thing was good versus evil framing. Iran is cast as Gog versus Magog. Yeah, everything is always like, and the amazing thing is that no one has ever attacked this country, right? Either these people are dreadfully paranoid, or this is really just about the eugenics plot, right? They have to come up with these wars and stuff so they have a reason to kill the rest of us, right? Make our lives miserable, kill us, traumatize us. So, yeah, I think I'm about ready to wrap up here. So I have more information down below about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I'm not going to go heavily into it because here's how it's working. Some things are being done out of Israel and some things are being done out of the United States. For example, Julian Assange founded WikiLeaks in 2006. A lot of people don't know the history. Julian Assange himself set up Wikipedia, okay? That page that we all reference of, right? Well, what happened was critics quickly noticed that no major leaks embarrassing Israel came out, despite WikiLeaks exposing the US, UK, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and all of them. Some State Department cables, including mild criticisms of Israel, but nothing explosive. Unusual given U.S.-Israel relations. Now, our relations they're both the same people, right? The U.S. always does dual operations. All they're trying to do right now is grab that land because they want to be over there because they want this greater Israel thing. They literally want to mow into all of their neighbors' land. All Israel has done since it got started over there, when it got stolen and given to them over there, all they have done is ruthlessly bombed all of their neighbors. So some of this is being run out of the U.S. and some is being run out of Israel. And Julian Assange he admitted that WikiLeaks material was shown to Israel before publication. Some vetting alleges differently. Anyway, I've got it all down there. Why do they do this stuff? Well, they do this stuff because it's part of their, if we look at the root theory of this, it isn't necessarily that Assange himself, it's how leaks were weaponized, okay? WikiLeaks started as a radical transparency tool, but by 2010 to 2011, it was operating inside the gravity field of state intelligence, media partners, and geopolitical things. So I need to close off this show. Anyway, I have all the Julian Assange stuff down below, and what they consider this Yahweh, they consider Yahweh to be the psychopath god. Violent commands, Yahweh orders massacres, the Amalekites, the Canaanites, idol destruction, extreme exclusivity, death for worshiping other gods, emotional volatility, collective punishments, multi-generational curses. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And the elites at one point were El for elites, and now they're Yahweh, right? So anything you want to know about it, I have down below. But yeah, Julian Assange, he actually comes from he's one of those royal family actors. I had actually shared a couple DMs with his fake mother when I had my Twitter account. Didn't know they were fake at the time, but anyway, so for sure he's a CIA asset because if you think about it yourself, well, they got Snowden, right? Well, Snowden came out of that group called The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald and that whole group. Well, they're all agents, okay? Snowden is a royal actor himself and was also an agent, and it came out of The Intercept. Well, who runs The Intercept? Well, The Intercept was originally founded by a billionaire that started eBay. So what I would encourage you to do before you pull up your chair and start listening to any of these people, any of them, I would say first, just take a look. It took me sometimes it might take 2 minutes to take a look at these people. I mean, their information is not usually that well hidden, okay? So that anybody basically with any kind of skills could go ahead and find out who these people are for yourself. And I would say that then I would stop paying attention to them because they all are there to trick and destroy the rest of us. They have no good intentions for any of us. They were the ones, they're so weak in the head that they had to they had to get rid of the downvotes on social media because they cannot take it when somebody goes after one of them. So, still today, we have a bunch of fouled up people that don't know what really went on. All those people with all those Bibles and stuff. The facts are the facts. It was started by these same gypsies. It did not happen thousands of years ago. There is no way it could have happened thousands of years ago. So remember this. Those who control the past script the future. And when they call it prophecy, I call it programming. Be safe out there. Goodbye for now.